One of the oldest and most enduring questions that has been asked throughout human history in various capacities is, what is the world made of? And more importantly, how do we actually know? Before microscopes and the standard model for particle physics had even been firmly established, and long before the theories of Dalton or Democritus had even been speculated, there was an atomic theory in late Vedic India that speculated a view of reality that was, in many ways, astonishingly modern. This is the story and exploration of Vaiśeṣika, one of the 6 classical Hindu viewpoints, or darshanas, and perhaps the oldest detailed philosophy of atomism in human history. Vaisheshika is traditionally attributed to the semi-legendary sage Kaṇāda Kashyapa, whose name literally means atom eater, and is also known as Ulluka, the owl. Little is known about his life, but most scholars typically place him between the 6th and 2nd centuries BCE, roughly contemporaneous with the early Upanishads, the Buddha, and the Jain Tirthankaras. His seminal work, as we will come to see, was the Vaisheshika Sutra, and it lays the foundation for this complex atomic and metaphysical system. Before commencing this exploration, I think it is best first that we contextualize. Late Vedic India witnessed a significant intellectual transformation. We see that philosophical inquiry began to eclipse ritualistic orthodoxy as the metaphysical hymns of the Vedas gave way to speculative and deeply metaphysical texts like the Upanishads, which at its core sought to understand the relationship between the self, the Atman, and the absolute, Brahman, the incarnate or conception of an overarching absolute reality. The Buddhists, who reacted critically to the idea of a permanent self, instead emphasized the idea of anatta, or non-self, and argued against dependent origination. The Jains, for their part, posited a pluralistic realism that emphasized and was centered upon the eternal, individual soul, known as the jiva, and also adhered to a stringent form of non-violence known as ahimsa, which was a focal point of Jain practice. They were also deeply rooted in their own dualistic metaphysics. Vaisheshika's inquiry, however, took a different path. Rather than prioritizing subjective introspection or the rejection of permanence, the Vaisheshika system turned their attention to the composition of reality and understanding the human experience and how this correlates with our empirical observation of the separatism that we experience within reality. This worldview is outlined in the Vaisheshika Sutra, which is a laconic, aphoristic, and deeply systematic text. The term Vaisheshika etymologically derives in Sanskrit from the word Vishesha, which means distinctiveness or particularity, and this refers to the individuality of innumerable existing objects. In this light, the Vaisheshika school of thought sought not just to describe reality, but instead to dissect and classify it with metaphysical precision. And as such, we find that the namesake text, the Vaisheshika Sutra, is less of a narrative and more of a map, which details a schematic of being in the nature of human experience. We see in the opening mantras of the Vaisheshika Sutra, that which exists and can be known is padārtha. In this context, as we will come to see in greater detail, a padārtha is that which both exists and can be known, a fundamental category of being that forms the basis of the world and our understanding of it. It should be remembered that all Hindu darshanas, worldviews, or systems of philosophy, share a common axiom at the root of their systems, and this is the recognition that the human mode of experience is fundamentally beholden to a state of suffering, and that the ultimate aim of each school of thought was to offer a means of understanding the human condition in relation to the cosmos by positing a methodology of deriving salvatory knowledge to alleviate the suffering that one inevitably experiences. And while the Vaisheshika system was deeply rooted in empirical and perceptual reality, it maintained throughout the entire course of its work and existence a soteriological aim. It held that through the discernment of different categories, of understanding the composition and the nature of being in our experience, one may come to a liberative understanding of reality and be freed from the bondages of suffering and live in a liberated state, which was known as moksha. So now let us begin this examination of the fascinating and astonishingly modern system of Vaisheshika. Historically, the Vaisheshika Sutra originally enumerated 6 padārthas, or categories of being, which were later expanded to 7 with the inclusion of abhava, or non-being, by subsequent Vaisheshika thinkers. These categories form the framework through which all objects and phenomena are to be known and understood. I believe it is worth examining each of these padārthas, each of these categories of being, in detail and seeing how they play a role in constituting reality in our experience of it. The first padārtha is dravya, or substance. Dravyas are the substrata in which qualities, guna, and actions, karma, inhere. They are further classified into 9 types. There is 5 physical dravyas, which are earth, water, fire, air, and akasha, or ether. And there are 4 non-physical substances within the Vaisheshika system. These are time, space, atman, which is the self, and manas, the mind. Each substance is in possession of unique characteristics. For example, we see that earth is characterized by smell, taste, and solidity. Fire is characterized by light and heat. Ether, although imperceptible, is postulated as the medium through which sound travels. Among the non-physical entities, time and space are considered to be eternal and infinite. And the self, or Atman, is conscious, moral, and the experiencer of karma. It is plural in nature and intrinsic to the human condition. Manas, the internal organ, serves as the interface between the self and our sensory input of empirical reality, which acts as a bridge between stimuli and inner cognition. Going further, each dravya is qualified by the next padārtha, a guna, or quality. Gunas are attributes that reside in substances but lack independent existence in and of themselves. For example, the redness of a rose cannot exist apart from the rose itself. It is a dependent quality. While the rose exists as a constitution of earth dravya, its color is not self-subsisting. The Vaisheshikas identified 24 such qualities inherent in substances, and these include things like color, taste, smell, number, size, separateness, conjunction, disjunction, cognition, and more. Substance is then classified by the notion of karma. While karma has taken on a wide array of meanings in popular and Western discourse, we see that in the Vaisheshika school of thought, it means exclusively the idea of motion or change. Unlike guna, which is static, karma implies transformation. Vaisheshika recognizes 5 types of motion: upward, downward, contraction, expansion, and locomotion. This category accounts for the dynamism and movement observed in our physical world. And following karma is the notion of samanya, or generality, or universals. This is an overarching class of a given concept. It is the principle that allows for shared characteristics, such as cowness in all cows, or humanness in all human beings. Samanya enables classification and the cognition of common properties. And what comes to differentiate these shared concepts or properties is the notion or padārtha that is regarded as Vaiśeṣika, or particularity. Vaiśeṣika is the principle of individuation, especially among the eternal substances like atoms. It is through Vaiśeṣika that one atom is distinguished from another, and likewise, one atman or manas from another. Though their substance may be identical, their particularity renders each unique and irreducible. So this was Vaisheshika's way of accounting for the multiplicity of being and divergence that we experience within human nature, for example. Each person is in possession of a state of cognition, in possession of a mind, and in possession of a soul. And while as a substrata of existence, these are all indistinguishable, they are all of the same substance, it is through Vaiśeṣika, it is through their particularity that we see this individuation arise, that we see this level of uniqueness present itself, in that there is multiple beings, there's multiple modes of consciousness, there is multiple ways of thinking or expressing the individuality of the self, while the self as a substance is irreducibly the same as any other self. The sixth original category, and this was originally the last category until later Vaisheshika thinkers introduced the seventh, was known as samavaya, or inherence. This category accounts for the intimate and inseparable relationship that is shared between entities, such as the idea of a thread that composes cloth, or the redness inhering in a rose. It is a unique eternal relation that cannot be separated from the entity it is bound to. And lastly is the seventh category, known as abhalva, which is non-existence. And this was introduced by later Vaisheshika thinkers to explain negation or absence. It includes four types: prior absence, destruction, mutual negation, and absolute non-existence. And though these categories of being may seem abstract, they are not simply a metaphysical classification. They are epistemological tools that help us discern and differentiate our empirical reality. In that regard, these categories are not simply a means of description, they are our means of structuring and understanding reality as we experience it, and serve as tools which allow our empirical observations to be made intelligible. As the 19th century commentator on the Vaisheshika Sutra proclaims, ontology, when rightly seen, becomes the grammar of salvation. But the pursuit of knowledge for the Vaisheshikas is not merely intellectual. It is soteriological, meaning it has the ultimate aim or function for salvatory knowledge. The padārthas are then not dry metaphysical categories, but instruments of discernment, tools through which the illusions of misidentification and false attribution are stripped away. They form a pathway from ignorance to insight, from bondage to liberation. But how deep does this method of categorization go? To answer that, we must turn to one of Vaisheshika's most profound and enduring contributions to world philosophy, its intricate and sophisticated theory of atomism. Kaṇāda proposed that all material substances are composed of indivisible, eternal atoms called padārthas. The term is itself revealing. Parama means ultimate or beyond, and anu refers to the atom or minute principle. Together, a paramanu designates the smallest conceivable unit of substance beyond perception, beyond measurement, and incapable of division. As the later Vaisheshika thinker Praṣāśtapada states, atoms are those which are indestructible, indivisible, and possess particularities. Each paramanu is unique to its elemental kind, earth, water, fire, or air, and inherently possesses the qualities specific to that type of matter. These atoms, though themselves imperceptible, combine to form the basis of all perceptible objects. Two paramanus first unite to form a dyad. Three dyads then combine to form a triad. It is only at the level of the triad that substance becomes visible to the human senses. This process of combination is not random. It is guided by the intrinsic motion of atoms, which then initiates and directs their interactions. We see again in Praṣāśtapada's great commentary. The union of atoms is not random. It is regulated by karma and nature. Even the smallest particle obeys law. What is significant here is not merely the mechanistic nature of matter, but the notion that material formation is entwined with order, law, and motion, that even the most minuscule elements are embedded within a cosmic framework of causality and dharma. In this sense, matter is not dead. It is alive with motion, law, and significance. Unlike the atomism of Dalton, which reduces atoms to the state of mechanistic particles with no inherent nature to them, Kaṇāda's atomism operates within a much broader moral and epistemological order. These atoms are not only the constituents of our empirical reality, they are the scaffolding in which reality becomes intelligible to our senses. In the Vaiśeṣika system, the manas, mind, and atman, self, are themselves classified as substances, and it is through their contact with sense organs and through the triadic aggregates of atoms that experience is rendered possible. Thus, atomic structure is not the basis of physical formation, but the precondition for perception, cognition, and experience itself. Furthermore, atoms are eternal and indestructible. They are never created nor destroyed, only rearranged. This insight aligns with the Vaisheshika atomism with the Hindu cosmological view of the Kala Chakra, or the Wheel of Time, in which the universe endlessly cycles through creation, dissolution, and recreation. Atoms are the imperishable building blocks of this eternal reoccurrence. As Prashashtapada so elegantly summarizes, what is manifest is but the rearrangement of the eternal, the subtle into the gross. Vaisheshika's atomism, then, is not just a physical theory. It is a metaphysical vision of order, of relation, and of revelation. To the Vaisheshika school, the atomic world is not inert. It is meaningful, and it is through its pattern structure that the self comes to know, to discern, and to ultimately transcend its limitative understanding, its inherent suffering that it experiences from misidentification and of false knowledge. So if the Vaisheshika ontology explains what exists, its epistemology seeks to answer how we come to know what exists. The two are not separate endeavors. For the Vaisheshika system, knowledge is not merely the accumulation of facts, it is the very process by which the real is uncovered from illusion. Just as atoms constitute the building blocks of material form, so too do the means of knowledge, the pramanas, construct the bridge between perception and truth. Initially, the Vaisheshika system maintained a very strict empiricism and only recognized two valid modes of epistemology, two valid pramanas. And this is the view that knowledge is gained directly through the contact of the senses with external objects. It is the immediate, non-verbal, and the preconceptual experience of that which is there. For perception to occur, there must be contact between the sense organ, the indriya, and the internal organ, the manas, the self, the atman, and the object itself. Only when this chain is complete does perceptual knowledge arise and may it take place. The second pramana is known as anumana, or inference. Knowledge of the unseen is derived from the seen, and inference arises when an observed phenomenon is connected to a previously established universal relation. For example, seeing smoke, one may be able to infer fire, and this is only possible through the prior knowledge of the invariable connection between these two aspects. As the Vaisheshika Sutra states, inference arises when a known attribute is seen to be universally connected with another yet unseen attribute. To Vaisheshika, this is not mere speculation, but a disciplined mental movement, founded on repeatable experience. The inferential process involves three key components. The first is paksha, the subject. For example, a hill. The second is hetu, or reason. For example, the presence of smoke. The third is sadhya, or the predicate, which is the presence of fire. And when these are correctly applied, inference becomes a precise instrument cutting through uncertainty and allows us to reveal hidden structures of reality. However, as the Vaisheshika school matured, and entered a deeper dialogue with one of the other 6 orthodox branches of Hindu philosophy, namely the Nyāya school of thought. Its epistemological framework and methodology greatly expanded. Nyāya was a school of logic and reasoning, and it recognized 4 valid pramanas, or means of knowing. These were perception, inference, comparison, and verbal testimony. While Vaisheshika had initially prided itself on its parsimonious approach, later thinkers, especially under the synthesis with Nyāya, recognized the utility of these additional sources of knowledge. Comparison, upamana, allows for knowledge through similarity. For instance, recognizing a wild ox in the forest after having heard it described. And verbal testimony, especially when rooted in authoritative or scriptural sources, acknowledges the legitimacy of learning from valid speech. And the Nyāya Vaisheshika synthesis became much more than just a merger of 2 systems. It represented a philosophical evolution. Where the Vaisheshika philosophy brought ontological precision, the Nyāya school of thought offered epistemological depth. And together they formed a comprehensive methodology for knowing the world, which became empirical, inferential, analogical, and testimonial. This bridge, which was now reinforced by multiple means of access, was central to the later Nyāya Vaisheshika tradition. And in this view, to know is not to believe, nor merely to see. It is the ability to discern, to analyze, and to test. The Nyāya Vaisheshika synthesis of epistemology becomes a refined instrument for navigating reality, and one that honors the senses, sharpens logic, and ultimately offers release from confusion and suffering. For all its attention for physical substances and the various categories of beings that it postulated, the Vaisheshika school is not an exclusively materialist system. It does not reduce human experiences to bodily processes, nor does it deny the reality of human consciousness. Instead, it makes room. It makes a epistemologically sound and metaphysical space for the self, the Atman. In Vaisheshika ontology, the Atman is not a metaphor or a psychological abstraction. It is a substance, a dravya. The self is real, eternal, and it is the locus of cognition, the bearer of karma, and the substratum of memory. It is the experiencer of pleasure and pain. Each individual Atman is distinct and plural, and there is no single undivided self, as is seen in the other traditions of Hindu thought, such as Advaita Vedanta. Here, the Atman is many, and each person's consciousness is their own. Yet, according to Vaisheshika, the self does not perceive the world directly. That role falls to the manas, the internal organ or mind, which mediates between the sense organs and the self. The mind connects perception to experience, but the self is the ultimate knower, the witness of all that occurs. This epistemological dualism between manas as processor and Atman as experiencer forms the basis of Vaisheshika's theory of cognition. But cognition is not the end, it is the means. The final aim is moksha, or liberation from suffering, bondage, and rebirth. But how is such liberation even achieved? It is not through ritual, and it is not through devotion, and it is not through mystical absorption. The Vaisheshika path is as austere as it is intellectual. The path to freedom is paved with discernment, the careful, disciplined understanding of what exists, how it exists, and how it is known. There is no room for devotional worship, no personal deity, and no salvific grace. The system is non-theistic, but not nihilistic. It believes not in God, but in law, in ontology, and the cleansing power of clarity. As an anonymous commentator from the Benares school once wrote, true liberation is not to be found in ritual, but in the discernment of what is real from what only seems real. So this is the ethical vision of Vaisheshika. to uproot suffering by eradicating error. To be free is not merely to escape rebirth, the idea of reincarnation, which dominated and still does dominate Hindu thought. But liberation was to cease misidentifying what is transient for what is permanent and what is apparent for what is actually true. In this sense, Vaisheshika ethics is ontological. To know rightly is to live rightly, and to live rightly is to be free. Moksha, or spiritual liberation, then, is not a mystical union. It is the cessation of motion, of karma, of bondage. It is the self resting in the clarity of what is. So now, as we reflect upon the Vaisheshika system and come to see that it posited a meticulous ontology, atomistic realism with striking epistemological clarity, it becomes clear that its influence could not remain contained. And as I've stated, over time, its insights would find profound resonance with another of India's classical darshanas, namely the Nyāya tradition. While Vaisheshika offered the categories of being and a proto-scientific method for knowing, Nyāya offered a more expansive epistemology, a rigorous theory of logic, and a sharpened framework for debate and reasoning. The two systems, though distinct in origin, proved to have a complementary vision, and their eventual synthesis was not a collapse of boundaries but a maturation, a philosophical convergence where Nyāya furnished the tools of valid reasoning, and Vaisheshika offered the structure of what could be known. And historically, we see that this convergence became one of the most influential alliances in classical Indian thought. For centuries, the Nyāya Vaisheshika system shaped not only scholastic debates, but the very architecture of logic, metaphysics, and natural philosophy across traditions. And we even see that their influence extended far beyond Hindu schools. Buddhist philosophers in various Buddhist schools still employ the Nyāya system of logic and debate today, such as the Vajrayana school of Tibetan Buddhism, or early Chan Buddhist schools, and modern Zen schools of Japan. Later Vedantins and Jain logicians would engage, challenge, and even adopt Nyāya Vaisheshika positions. As the philosopher B.K. Matilal noted, Vaisheshika's realism is not naive materialism. It is an attempt to honor the integrity of empirical reality while preserving the metaphysical necessity of the self. And in this way, the Vaisheshika system did not fade into obscurity, it diffused, enriching and being enriched by a larger intellectual movement. The Nyāya Vaisheshika tradition thus stands not only as a monument of Indian rationalism, but as a living dialogue between logic and reality, thought and being, precision and presence. So revisiting our question that was asked in the beginning of this video, what does it mean to know this world? We can see for Kaṇāda, or the Vaisheshika school, that it was not simply enough to believe or intuit. One must categorize, analyze, and reflect. To know was to grasp the structure beneath the surface, to understand the order within the cosmos. Reality was not meant to be simply observed, it was meant to be understood. And understanding reality was the path to liberation, the path to freeing oneself from bondage and suffering. We see that this system posited that the world is intelligible, and this intelligibility is not simply incidental. It is the very mark of the sacred architecture. Each padārtha, each atom, each quality, each emotion points not only to the physical constitution of things, but to the epistemic clarity by which the self may break its bonds. A traditional Nyāya Vaisheshika aphorism declares, "Only the knower of distinctions, Vaiśeṣika, perceives clearly the dance of dharma." Ignorance is not eternal, though atoms may be. What changes is the clarity of vision. The soteriology of Vaisheshika is not devotional or ritualistic. It is discernment as deliverance, ontology as a means of freedom, To see clearly is to be released. So next time you hear the word atom, pause. Remember that long before any physicist shattered matter in a laboratory, a philosopher in ancient India dismantled illusion with logic. His name was Kaṇāda of the Vaisheshika school of thought, and he believed that the smallest things could reveal the greatest truths. Thank you for joining me today on this exploration. I appreciate your viewership, and I look forward to delivering you more content. I'll see you next time.